My name is Ruth Wykes, and I am... thank you. No, enough. Sisters in Crime, I have to read this, I apologise. Sisters in Crime is delighted to welcome you tonight to Murder, Mystery and Memory. This is the first Sisters in Crime event I've presented, so please be gentle. Did you write that? Thank you.
Well, you just have to say it if you don't.
Oh, well, no, I'm just reading what you told me to. Please also welcome our panel, Megan Golden, who is over on my left, and in the middle, Tanya Chandler, and on the right, a brand new debut author, Nell Pearce. Sorry for making you do that. They'll be talking to us tonight about what happens when evidence points to you having committed murder, made someone disappear, committed some sort of crime, or been the victim of one, but you have no memory of it. At the outset, on behalf of Sisters in Crime Australia, we respectfully acknowledge the traditional owners of the land, the people of the Kulin Nations. We pay our respects to their elders, past and present. We acknowledge and uphold their continuing relationship to the land and the sea. All right, so very briefly, how tonight's going to work. I'm going to ask some questions and have a conversation with these amazing authors. And that happens for about an hour. Then we break for drinks. We buy books up the back. And I believe it's the Sun Bookshop, who are amazing supporters of Sisters in Crime. And what did I miss? Oh, and the raffle. So have the raffle tickets been around? Have they been sold yet? Or please make sure you buy some and support this incredible Sisters in Crime organisation. So in the second half, we will resume for the raffle draw, questions to the panellists, and a prize for the best question, and the judge of that will be Priscilla. So she accepts bribes, I know, because she's my friend. Then a bit after 10 o'clock we'll head downstairs and we will have some drinks, coffee, whatever you like, and some criminal, conviviality. Please feel free to join us downstairs. All right, so I'm going to introduce you now to the panel. Megan Golden was a correspondent in the Middle East and Asia before returning back to her hometown of Melbourne, where she launched her writing career in 2017 with her debut novel, The Girl in Keller's Way. Megan has since written other best-selling thrillers, including The Escape Room and The Night Swim, a novel that was shortlisted for Book of the Year in the USA. Wow. Meanwhile, she's sold the film rights for her second book, The Escape Room, which is set almost entirely in a lift. Megan's fourth psychological thriller, Stay Awake, was published 2 months ago. Have we got one to hold up? All right, in the middle is Tanya Chandler, a Melbourne-based writer, writing teacher and editor. Her books have been published in Australia and internationally, selected for, my apologies, for reading programs and shortlisted for awards, including Sisters in Crime's David Awards. All three of her novels are based around the life experience of strong female protagonists and the theme of memory, loss, and the road to personal redemption. Tanya's third crime novel, All That I Remember About Dean Kohler, was published last year. Can we hold it up there? All right. right, and this is Nell Pierce. She holds a Masters of Fine Art in Fiction from the New School in New York City and has worked as an associate literary agent and as a legal associate at the Family Court of Australia. Her debut novel, A Place Near Eden, was the winner of the 2022 Vogel Award. Got to hold it up. Righty-ho. On that note, let's get into the conversation. Welcome all of you and thank you for coming tonight. Let's start with the traditional Sisters in Crime elevator pitch. If we can start with you, Megan, and just a brief outline of what your new book is about.
Okay, thank you. Stay Awake is about, I'll set it up for you because I don't like divulging too much of the plot, but it's about a woman who wakes up in a cab. She's on her way home to her apartment in Brooklyn. She gets to her apartment and there's strangers living there and they've never seen her before and they promptly kick her out. And while she's sitting on the stoop trying to figure out what to do, she discovers a knife covered in blood in her pocket. And off she goes trying to figure out what's going on. Actually, the reader knows more than she does because she loses her memory every time she falls asleep. And she falls asleep a few times during the book. So...
Tanya?
Okay, elevator pitch. I'm really bad at elevator pitches. My third novel, All That I Remember About Dean Kohler, is not really about Dean Kohler. It's about a woman called Sydney who lives with diverse mental health. Soon after Sydney decides to stop taking her medication, not for the first time, she finds a poem that she wrote for somebody called Dean Kohler, who was her teenage crush, and she wrote the poem when she was 16, and she becomes preoccupied with trying to remember what happened to Dean, which is really more about what happened to her. Almost in the middle of the book, her mother dies, so she has to go back to her childhood home, and there she discovers the rest of her diary, which the poem was written on a page from the diary. So she finds that, and what she reads is quite traumatic. It's hard not to give away a lot about this book, but in the middle we see her back in psychiatric care. What else? I will say that our hero goes on to survive and find the truth that will set her free.
My novel, A Place Near Eden, is a lot of it set near the town of Eden on the south coast of New South Wales. It's a bit of a mystery and a bit of a family drama about a young woman called Tilly who has a foster brother when she's young who's taken away from their family. And then in the novel, which is some years later, she's reflecting back on that time with her foster brother, and they also reconnect, and she has to come to terms with her responsibility for some of the things that have happened to him and that then subsequently happened to him.
Thank you. My first question, because all of you have tackled one of the hardest things ever, memory and memory loss, in three very different imaginative ways. Memory loss is usually associated with trauma or injury or mental health. I'm wondering if you can tell us what drew you to write about something as challenging as memory loss.
You're all looking at
Yeah, I'm looking at you. You all have to sort of answer
it's a difficult question. The Girl in Keller's Way, my first book, and Stay Awake both deal with memory loss. I find it very interesting because I have to say, as I get older, I don't remember as much as I used to.
Wait till you're 75 though.
It just becomes I write thrillers and it's a great vehicle in terms of suspense. So, plus it's just really interesting. In The Girl in Keller's Way, I really delved into issues related to memory. What do you remember, and is what you remember actually correct? And it's very interesting to sort of read and to understand that whole issue around memory, because often what we remember is not correct at all. It's our perception of an event or it's been coloured over time. So I find that topic really interesting.
And in Stay Awake, your protagonist has some amnesiac, great long word thing that I can't remember, that is stopping her from, making her forget every time she falls asleep. How hard was that to write, to put yourself in that person's place, to become that protagonist and think, because that's tricky, the way you had to write it was really tricky.
It was very hard because my challenge, when I Stay Awake started from a writing challenge that I set to myself, which is that I wanted to write a thriller from the perspective of an amnesiac in first person, and initially I wanted the whole book to just be the amnesiac. It was very hard to do. And that, so when a lot of the book is first person, and it is a character who loses her memory, and as I said before, she falls asleep, and even in one time she nods off on a train for a few minutes, wakes up with no memory again. So first of all, it was, I really I needed to do that, but each time you have to set it up again. You don't want it to be repetitive, but at the same time, there's still pertinent information that would happen if you just woke up with no memory. There's certain things you're going to do. You're going to look for your wallet, you're going to look for your bag. There's certain things that you have to go through. So I had to try and do that in a way each time that was different, so it wasn't this sort of mundane repetition. But secondly, because she's an amnesiac, there's a lot of things she doesn't know, and I had to make sure that in each time that she wakes up again, I'm not giving her knowledge that she wouldn't have. And that was pretty tough to do. And we had to, when we edited it, we really looked out for that to make sure that we didn't have, situations where she remembered things that she shouldn't have known. So it was very difficult, actually, yes.
It would have been tricky. It would have definitely been. Tanya, your memory loss came from mental health and psychosis rather than amnesia, wasn't it?
Yeah, so my protagonist, Sydney, lives with schizophrenia, so in schizophrenia there is a dysfunction in the brain, so memories are not encoded and stored or recalled the way that healthy people do. There's also trauma, so that is related to her. I guess memory loss. It's hard to it's hard to describe really, but yeah. So the brain functions differently, and some of those memories are lost through illness, through its treatments over time. But it's interesting that even in healthy people, it's really hard to recall memories. And the idea, when I first started writing this book, I wrote everything that I could remember about a certain person from a certain time, just in my own memory. And there are some parts that you just can't remember, and I'm fascinated by why. There are some parts that are kind of blank, and some parts that we hold on to and remember. And I'm drawn time and time again to the theme of memory. I guess I'm really afraid of losing my own memory. That's one of my greatest fears, because I draw on it so much for my writing. But Sydney's memory loss, I guess, is due to illness.
And now what about you? What was the memory loss in yours?
Yeah, I think, Tilly, the main character, has trouble remembering what's happened, and I think that there is a sense that her memory loss is greater than maybe the average person's. But I think, as with Megan and Tanya, the whole idea of memory is something that interests me, and I think it is really difficult sometimes to remember exactly how things went. And I think as well, I worked for a year as a judge's associate in the family court, and none of those cases specifically informed this book, but one big thing that I took away was that the different parties to a relationship can remember the same shared event really differently, and I felt that with my own partner and with my family. You know, you think it happened one way and they think it happened another way. And I really wanted to explore that in this book. And in the second half, there's also a kind of documentary element as well, which gives, I think maybe because in a novel you're telling a story, and everyone, when they're telling stories, is kind of, I don't know, bringing in their own perspective or their own slant on the facts. I wanted to give all the characters the opportunity to tell their stories too, or to tell stories within the story about what happened, because, yeah, that really fascinates me, I guess, that with good intentions, in a way, you can remember things really differently. Yeah.
And they've recently changed the rules for witness statements, haven't they?
In the family court, or
Yeah, I think so.
yeah, you would. To be honest, since I found, you know, it was a fascinating job, but I felt after the year that it wasn't for me. It was pretty sad and hard going, and I haven't done any law since I went to New York, and I worked in book publishing, so I'm really out of touch with I know that I think the actual... this is kind of a digression, but I think that the family court now, a lot of their cases are handled through... is it through the... it wouldn't be through the federal court, exactly. Yes, they've changed, thank you, how it's run. But I don't know anything about it. I'm definitely not an expert on that.
Yeah, but it's a really good point about, you know, I think it's well documented now that when police are taking witness statements for crimes, you will get 4 different people giving 4 different descriptions of a person or an event. So memory normally is unreliable. But
And in fact, I mean, I was a journalist for many years, and I would often interview people for, you know, there'd be a breaking news story, and I'd interview witnesses, and it was always very interesting to me how some people would remember things that just didn't happen. I mean, because there was enough information where you knew what happened, but their perception of what happened was different from what actually happened. And it's interesting, and it's also a bit troubling in that sometimes there might be an entire case that hangs on a witness's testimony, and just somebody who remembers something it didn't necessarily happen that way. So I think that aspect to it as well, when you're writing about crime, is really interesting.
it is. It's something you could talk about for a week, isn't it, and still not get right down to the bottom of it. So let's move on to something lighter. One of the reasons people love reading crime fiction is the setting of a book, because we all, as readers, feel like we've visited a new and exotic or just somewhere we haven't been, and certainly during the last 2.5 years of lockdown, going to the other side of town was an adventure. So tell me, what determined how you chose to set your book? Like, yours is set in America, isn't it? So how do you choose your setting and why?
Oh, it's difficult. I'd just been in the US, and I'd stayed in Brooklyn, I guess, a few months before I started writing Stay Awake. So that might have influenced me. My publisher's an American publisher, and they're quite keen to have books set in the US. And also, it just, because I had visited New York and I stayed in Brooklyn with a friend, it sort of fired up my imagination. But also, I don't know, the story just seemed to really work in that context. It's really, Stay Awake is really about 24 hours in somebody's life. So it kind of works well in a city like New York, you know, a busy place. And I wrote it during lockdown in my car. We were talking about that over dinner, and so it was a really nice escapism for me.
You did hear that. She wrote it in her car over lockdown.
Yeah. Well, my kids were being homeschooled in the car, in the house, and occasionally came out to the car for homework help and and lunch requests. But it was nice just to sort of transport myself out of here and be somewhere else.
Tanya, what was your decision based on?
My story is set partly in the city, in Melbourne, and partly in an unnamed rural country town. I think the reasoning behind that, probably I wanted to show that my protagonist in the present is in the city, so she has made it out of the horrible kind of parochial country town where she lived, with this kind of this undercurrent that you've seen a lot of of places like that of just misogyny and sexism. So, and I knew that it had to be somewhere that was hot and just awful and flat and dry. And I went to my writer's retreat. I say that. It was a shack out in the middle of nowhere up near the Murray River. And I went and stayed up there by myself for a while just to get the feeling of, the cracks in the earth and the trucks gearing down on the highway and the flies.
Sounds like where I grew up.
Oh yeah, I like that. I like the kind of the highway, the highway around there, and it was on the river. The river is really important to the story as well. Yeah, it's kind of a metaphor in a way and a containment kind of device.
And the peacocks. I
the
loved them.
peacocks, yes.
Loved the peacocks.
It was based on a place that I did actually live when I was young, and we did have 2 peacocks.
We had one.
Bizarre.
They're weird animals, weird birds, aren't they?
Yeah,
to
they need
grow
a friend.
up with.
They need a friend. 2 of them.
Now, what made you decide to set your book where you did?
Yeah, so it's part of it's set in Canberra where I grew up, some of it in Melbourne where I went to uni and obviously live now, but a lot of it's set near Eden, kind of actually in the area around Tathra, but Eden was better for the title, on the south coast of New South Wales. And I wrote a lot of this book when I was living in New York, and I was really homesick for the Australian bush and landscape, and especially that area of the coast. I spent a lot of time there growing up. My grandparents had a house there and we'd go all the time, and I still, now that I'm back, go there all the time. I love it. So that was the first thing I started with before I started any characters or any plot. I knew I wanted to write something set there. I think I felt like if I wrote it there, I could sort of go back mentally when I couldn't go back physically. And then I think because that area has some family significance for me, it kind of flowed that I started to write something kind of looking at family themes. And I think also, particularly that New South Wales coast has a kind of like a ruggedness to it. And to me, it kind of feels dangerous sometimes, like there's that rip in the ocean. And so kind of thinking about some of those darker or kind of more mysterious themes sort of naturally flowed from the landscape as well.
Yeah, it is lovely.
Yeah.
It's gorgeous. I want to move on to research. Do you go down a rabbit hole? Do you do research? Do you ignore research? Do you get lost in it? When you're plotting or pantsing your book, depending on how you write, do you go down the rabbit hole of research, Megan?
I think that I think all writers are natural procrastinators, and so if you were to start researching before you write a book, then you'd never get to the writing part. So I tend to do a little bit of research to begin with, and then as I write, I sort of discover my book goes in different directions and places I don't expect and don't know much about, and then I'll take a little writing break and might spend a day or 2 researching that, and then go back to writing it. It works for me because it breaks up, writing can be a really grueling process, so it's a nice diversion, and that's how I do it.
So for Stay Awake, did you do a lot of research?
I did, but I don't do it in one big block. So I did a bit, and then I started writing, and then I thought, I don't know too much about this, and I went off and I did a bit more research, and so I do it as I go along.
Okay. Tanya?
Yes, I did a lot of research for my book. I won't talk about it too long because I would go on forever. And I kind of do it the same way you do, Megan. I think it will be pointless to try and do a lot of research at the start because a lot of your book is not going to be there once you get to the subsequent drafts. So once I kind of know what I need to research, I'll go and do that. And also, if you need to get experts' advice, you don't want to waste their time. So you want to know what questions to ask them. So what did I research? Look, I had to... Sydney's husband is a firefighter, so I had to get in contact with an MFB firefighter to, see what the trucks are like and, all sorts of things, and about because he was her husband, I needed to know stupid things like, do you get your uniforms dry cleaned or would you wash them at home? And if I open up your wardrobe, what would I see in there? Or down to what colour would a fire be in certain types of fire? And Sydney's also a burn survivor, so I got in contact with an occupational therapist who was an expert in burns care, and she gave me access to the I don't know how I sat through watching it, but at the time, it was really important to me. The training videos that medical staff do to help burn survivors with their wounds. One fun thing I did was a bonsai course because Sydney keeps bonsai, so I went along and I can't write about it if I don't know how to do it. So I went along and did that. That was a lot of fun, except my bonsai died. So I don't have a green thumb like my main character does. So I could keep on going, but I won't. A lot of research. I did a lot of interviews with medical experts as well as people with lived experience of schizophrenia, and did a lot of courses and a lot of stuff. It was really important for it to be authentic.
Sounds really full on.
Yeah, it
really
was
full on. Nell, did you do a lot of research?
I did. I think I spent a long time writing the book. I just kind of worked on it a little bit in the mornings before work and on the weekend. So it took me about 5 years to write it. And so that's a lot of time to kind of research in a sort of broad sense. So I did a lot of reading. There's kind of an idea, a possibility of like an accidental killing in the book. So I did a lot of reading around that, reading around the foster system. It's interesting because I was living in the States, and so it's not, kind of a critique of the Australian foster system. In fact, some of the research I did was about the American system as well. And then towards the end, I started to do kind of more targeted research. There's a criminal element, so I spoke to a friend who's a criminal lawyer, checked in with a family member who's a social worker, things like that. So yes, I guess there was sort of broad research and then maybe some more focused, I guess when I had the whole story pinned down, some more focused research towards the end.
Yeah, there's a lot that goes into it, isn't there? I just want to explore a little bit one of the more broad questions, I suppose. In crime fiction, when you're writing crime fiction, how far is too far? What I'm thinking is that in real life, crime is horrible and it's violent and it's all those things. As crime writers, how far do we go before we think we've crossed over a line? Where do you stop, Megan?
First of all, with children, I don't think I can write about crime and children. I wrote The Night Swim, which is my book that came out actually on the first day of the long lockdown in Melbourne, which was really tough. But anyway, that book is actually interestingly connected to a lot of current events in Australia because it's about a rape trial. And so I was dealing with rape. And one of the things I didn't want it to be gratuitous. It had to be part of the story. It was so it's about a girl who it's about a trial and effectively a teenager and a young man, and she's made this accusation and there's a trial going on, and I didn't want it to be gratuitous, and it was really important for me that it be relevant to the plot and all of that. And around that time, in fact, I read a book that also had rape, and it was completely gratuitous. I was actually asked to review it, and it really kind of incensed me because it was very much it was just a way of driving the plot. It wasn't really, they could have done it in 10 different ways, but it had to be that one. So I think that when you do it, it really has to be, and you have to be really empathetic with the characters and all of that. Funnily enough, enough, I mean, I write about crime, but I'm like a scaredy cat. So, I told you I wrote in my car the Stay Awake, and you write these very scary scenes. Sometimes it's like 11 o'clock at night and it's pitch black outside. And so, I don't know, you have a certain threshold. I personally am not really into horror, and I don't have too much, you sort of, I don't want to get too much, my books are not that gory and all of that. So, you do have a threshold, and there is a line that you have to draw.
And I think readers are intelligent too. Some people forget that. I've read books where it's really obvious that the violence, whether it's rape or whether it's a graphic murder or something, has been added in rather than an organic part of the story. And we can tell. We as readers can tell when that's been done. Tanya, what are your limits?
I really hate books that are gratuitous, and I will just put them aside. I don't think that I've ever written to a genre, so my books are being marketed as crime, but I haven't really thought that much about how far you would push it as a crime writer. I have heard that in crime books you're not supposed to kill a dog.
No,
or
a cat.
a cat. So I've killed a lot of pets in my books because I haven't really.
It's the
thought
number
about
one rule: do not kill the family pet.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I have pushed that.
Without giving anything away.
I'm sorry.
That's funny. I won't say anything. Now, what are your limits?
Yeah, I think maybe similar to Tanya, I wasn't necessarily thinking about genre when I was writing, so it's kind of an interesting question to think about right now. Maybe the best thing I can say is that when I was writing this, I was kind of thinking about, the protagonist in my book is, in a way, potentially, and I think kind of the bad person, or potentially the bad person. And I think when I was writing it, I was kind of looking inside myself and looking at the bad parts of myself, or the ways in which I might be doing harm to others, and the ways that, and I think, what am I trying to say? Maybe that for me it had to be kind of a genuine exploration of badness in me, and that felt like a genuine, rather than imagining bad things happening, I wanted to question myself, I guess, and hold myself a bit accountable for the ways that I might be doing harm and not thinking about it, or the ways that people can I think passivity is kind of a theme in the book, and the ways that by doing nothing or by failing to act you can hurt people. I don't know if that answers the question. But
it does. The second part of my question, there's been a lot of movement sort of towards writing politically correct stories in the last 4 or 5 years, particularly. And also a big movement about you should write what you know. So you're probably all aware of different controversies that have happened, and I won't sort of outline them, but I'm interested. Given the growing trend that authors ought to tiptoe around certain topics or character types, does this influence your storytelling? Should it? And what's your view on it?
I'm aware of, obviously you're aware of sensitivities, and I guess it does influence, because if you're writing commercial fiction, then that is something that you take into account when you're writing it. I haven't, with crime, I haven't really faced it to that extent. I think one of the things that I've struggled with a bit is, in terms of characters, diversity of characters. So you want, you do want diverse characters, but on the other hand, you have to be careful. You don't want to be accused of of having experiences that you personally haven't experienced. It's a difficult area right now, and there's so many sensitivities around it.
It's extremely difficult, but, at what point do we stop being fearless? Agatha Christie wouldn't get published in 2022. And where would we be without Agatha? I don't know, it's a hard one, isn't it? Tanya, what do you think?
Oh, yeah, it's a really tough one, and it is in the back of your mind when you're writing. And I know some parts in my books I haven't included because I didn't want to be criticised for that. And I'm not sure if I regret that. But what I'm thinking about my fourth book, I kind of think, well, I don't care. I'm going to write whatever characters I want to because, I've kind of gone beyond the point of worrying about what other people are going to think. But it's really difficult, and I find that really politically correct books and are not believable, and I don't know, I find it really kind of annoys me. It's not truthful, and it feels like it's tokenism in a way sometimes. I don't know.
Yeah, I agree with you. Nell, what's your perspective?
It's definitely tough, and it's definitely something that I'm aware of. I feel like most writers are aware of it. I mean, it's like, to me, maybe the issue is kind of what you write. Should you only write what you know? And, to some extent, everyone's writing, most authors aren't exactly their character, and so to some extent they're writing what they don't know, but that's not really the issue. I think it's about maybe, there are, writing from the point of view of a minority experience that you haven't had. I think it's complicated, and maybe, there's a part of me that, of course, cares what other people think about me or is sensitive to criticism, but I try and put that part to one side, and maybe I try and see it more about, well, it's not about being criticised for doing this thing, but it's about, am I doing something that I think is wrong in my writing? That is, am I exploiting someone's story or writing about something that I actually feel like I shouldn't be writing about? And it's a difficult question, I guess, and maybe hard for you to adjudicate on yourself as well. I guess I'm open to the possibility that I might be criticised at some point, and if I feel like I've done the wrong thing, I guess what I'm saying is I think some of the criticism is valid, but it's not about being criticised. It's more about have you done something that was hurtful or exploitative or wrong. Yeah.
I have to say, I was a journalist for a long time, and one of the things that always gave me pause as a journalist was that by its nature, you are exploiting other people's stories for your headlines, and it was something I always felt very uncomfortable about, because you're going off and you're interviewing somebody, and it's whatever, you've got big headlines and you're getting great coverage everywhere, and you're all very proud and patting yourself on the back, but at the end of the day, somebody else experienced it. There's a lot of conflict in that. But I wanted to say something else, which is sort of taking this into a slightly different direction, but which I think it's quite interesting, which is, the other issue with, I think, books at the moment, and not just books but films as well, is people want sympathetic characters. People want characters that you like, and actually the most interesting characters are despicable characters. And it came up with a movie that I saw, and I can't remember the name of the movie, but it's set in Morocco. Did anybody else see that? Yes. What is it called?
The English one. No. It's a recent one.
Yeah. And
the Constant Guard.
No. Yeah. The Forgiven. The Forgiven. Okay. And they're all completely despicable characters, and it's a fabulous movie, but apparently it didn't do very well because people wanted sympathetic characters, and they were kind of upset that they couldn't really relate and like anybody. And but it was a terrific movie, and I think it's one of the problems, because I personally would rather write about unsympathetic characters. They're so much more interesting. But readers want sympathetic sympathetic characters who they, and so I mean, as a writer, it's difficult because you kind of want to write what you want and you want to kind of provoke people. But again, I mean, at least for me, I'm writing in commercial fiction and trying to make a living from it. So you sort of want to also write what people want to read. So it's difficult.
It's as a small sort of thing to that. A few years ago, Kylie Fox and I wrote a true crime book called Invisible Women, and it was about murdered sex workers. We got bollocked, didn't we? We got protested at Melbourne Film. What was it? The Melbourne Writers Festival. We trended on Twitter. But you know what? And I take this away with me. Several family members contacted us privately and said they were so grateful for what we had done and how we had done it. Even one young man who had been 4 years old when his mother was murdered said, "You are the first person to talk about my mother with respect." So they can hold up their umbrellas and say that just because I'm not a sex worker, I had no right to write that book as much as they want, because I feel like it was important and gave a voice to people. And I think sometimes we have to be a bit more fearless in how we write.
Right.
Sorry, that was a bit of a tangent, but...
Good one.
Okay. How much of you goes into your protagonist? How much of Megan did I read in that book?
It depends on the book. So, I don't know. I can say this, that with Stay Awake, again, it was written over COVID. It has nothing to do with COVID. There is not a single reference to it. We struggled. I mean, initially I said to my publisher, what do we do about it? Because we didn't know at the time what was going to happen. Was the pandemic going to be permanent? Or we decided not even to reference it. So it's got nothing to do with COVID, but there's a lot of angst. A lot of the angst was my angst. And the character, this sense of losing, because this character sort of lost 2 years of her life because there was a trauma in the past, and that's kind of what caused her to have these fugue states. And I very much felt like it was the same kind of feeling where you're sort of skipping ahead and there's this sort of big blur over the past couple of years, and you've lost a part of yourself and you've lost a part of your life. And so all of that angst that I had was sort of found its way into the novel in some ways, even though the book itself has got nothing to do with...
But was that ever conscious? Because it just occurred to me that what we all went through with lockdown has parallels with what your character was going through in the book.
Was it conscious? Maybe to an extent, but not really. It was just my angst. It was, I was sort of living through it, so my character was too, So I was sort of, this feeling as if your life was just skipping by and all of that, and it was projected into my character.
Wow.
Yeah.
Amazing. Tanya, what about you and Sydney?
Probably too much. I think I have this theory that, part character is part the author, part someone the author knows, and part made up. But then when I wrote this book, I thought there's a fourth dimension to this where the author starts to take on a bit of life of the character. It starts to rub off. I guess it's, I always talk about method writing and, really getting into the character's head and starting to, learn everything that they do. And yes, you kind of lose yourself a little bit in there. People have asked me if it was hard to write Sydney, and I think no, it wasn't hard at all. What was hard was once I was in her head to come out. So my own mental health suffered a lot while I was writing this book. I was really sick by the end of it. But I thought it would. But I didn't seek help because I thought it was helping me to write the book. So
there's something kind of strange about that.
It's strange. I know.
I understand it. I get it that you keep the experience going for the book, but And have you come out of it all right now, though?
Yeah. With I remember with my first book, my protagonist had really excruciating back pain, back problems, and I had that at the same time. And I thought, well, this is really helping me to write the book, understanding the pain that she's going through. But I'm not doing it with I find that the book I'm writing now, I have kind of put up this I never want to do that again. So I've kind of got this distance, and I don't know if I'm going to be able to write it that way. I just haven't felt that connection, but I don't want to go that deeply into it. I think I'm protecting myself a little bit or something. It's weird.
Yeah, well,
Weird.
if you've had, a bad back, mental health issues,
Well, yeah.
maybe it's perfectly
Time to stop, maybe, yeah.
understandable. Nell, are you Tilly?
I think I've kind of already said that, honestly, a lot of the worst parts of me are in all of the characters in this book. My passivity, I think a lot of the characters are quite self-involved. I can be self-involved. I think one of the things I'm looking at is kind of relationships and how you're responsible for other people and the people you love. And I think I have failed to be responsible for people in my life, or that's something that I've kind of learned as I grow. I mean, in a sense, the narrator kind of comes of age, and for me, maybe that was a big part of growing up, was realising that I'm responsible for others. And I think maybe at another level as well, I kind of have, I'd say I sort of have an anxiety problem. I'm an anxious person, but to the point of, I'll have to go back and check many, many times that I've turned the stove off, and I know that I've already checked, and then I still have to check again. And to me, that feeling of not trusting yourself is awful. And I think I wanted to kind of, there's a sense that Tilly doesn't trust herself and doesn't trust her own memory, and it's in a really different context. It's not checking the stove, it's about events in her past. But I think for me, I wanted to explore that unbearable feeling on the page, and maybe it has been helpful to do. I mean, I'm still anxious, although I think I've kind of dealt with the checking the stove thing, but it now expresses in other ways. Maybe it's something I'll just deal with for the rest of my life. But yes, I guess all that's to say that, there's a lot of me in the book, I guess. Yeah.
Fair enough. Thank you.
I think writing's a bit like method acting to an extent. Yeah.
It definitely sounds like it, doesn't it? What are you working on now, Megan? What's next?
My new book comes out next year. It's called Dark Corners, and it's with Rachel Kral, who's the podcaster from The Night Swim. And I'm supposed to start a new book in about. I'm doing the copy edit now. So once I finish that, I start my new book. But I still haven't quite. I've got a few ideas, but haven't quite gelled yet. So I don't know what I'm going to do.
And did this one get in, even done in the car or the kitchen table, or?
Oh, I don't even remember anymore. It's just been a blur. I think so. I think a lot of it was in the car.
Yeah.
I honestly don't even know how I managed to write over the past couple of years. So
It's been difficult, hasn't it?
Yeah, it has.
Just really weird. What's next for you?
When I received Nell's book in the post, I was horrified because my next book is set in Eden.
It's a great place.
Well, yeah, partly set in Eden, partly set in kind of a landlocked, grungy caravan park in the industrial outskirts of the city. And it was initially inspired by Grimm's fairy tale. There's a bit of tarot in there, a bit of dodgy fortune telling, a bit of love story as well, and a bit of not sticking to the fairy tale and maybe not always doing what your parents tell you, as some of those fairy tales teach us. So I don't really know.
And what about you, Nell?
I just had a baby 6 months ago. She actually arrived almost the same time as the book, so I had my two babies at once. But she has been keeping me busy, and I haven't done that much writing. But I'm trying to work. I wrote a short story based on my grandparents, actually my two grandmas, that I'm just finishing off now. But I'm also trying to start a new novel. Hopefully it won't take me 5 years this time. But as with last time, I've started with the setting. I'm thinking about maybe having some of it in New York, because I lived there for several years, some of it here, and some of it in Amsterdam in the Netherlands, because my parents and my sister live there. We're not Dutch, but they just all spontaneously moved there, which is exciting, and it's a lovely city. And I have some of the characters kind of coming together in my mind, maybe like a group of people, like characters and their siblings and parents. I sort of want like those family relationships and the generations to be there who know each other when they're young, and then looking at them again when they're kind of around my age in their like mid-30s, starting to have families, and but the kind of heart of the story hasn't emerged yet, so I'm just still kind of playing with the characters and the settings. Yeah.
Okay, that's...
I don't know. That's actually a big thing I've been wrestling with. Yeah, will there be... I don't even know if there will be a crime, or it feels like there should be, but I don't know. Yeah, I wish I had more clarity.
You got to remember, you don't do gratuitous crime just
Yes,
for the sake of it.
that's exactly right.
We would miss you, but, you have to write what you've got to write.
Yeah.
For all the aspiring writers out there, and I know there are a few because I know them, what is your best advice on how to knuckle down, not just write for a day? I didn't look at you. But how to knuckle down and actually take your writing seriously? What's your best advice?
Maybe two pieces of advice. The one is just to write, even if you're writing 300 words or 500 words a day over a year, that's a manuscript. So definitely do that. And the second is, I think that the editing process is very underrated. I think that it's really important, because we were actually talking before over dinner how the first draft can look pretty ugly. So don't be afraid of your first draft. And for me, actually, my first draft is a very bare bones kind of draft. And one of the pleasures that I find as a writer is taking that and then polishing it. And to me, that's the most fun, because the stress of having a story is done. I have the story now, and now I can have fun bringing out the best in it and polishing it, and not just the wordsmithery of it, but the plot. In Stay Awake, for example, that opening scene I described earlier, where she's kicked out of, she comes to her apartment and they're strangers, and she goes down on the stoop and doesn't know what's going on and what to do, and discovers a bloody knife in her pocket. I mean, that came in when I was editing it. I'd written it, but there wasn't a bloody knife in the pocket, and then I thought, hang on a second, why don't I put a knife in her pocket? And that's just a lot of fun to be able to do that. So don't be afraid if you're not happy with your first draft, because it's a process, and many books go through many drafts before they're published.
That's very true. Tanya, what's your best advice?
I think it's probably very similar to your advice. So finish what you start. Finish it. Whatever you do, just finish it. Get that first draft. Most people give up on their first draft because it is awful, and you have this idea in your mind of what you want to write, and it never looks like that, and it never can in the first draft. So once you've got that draft, then you can start writing and crafting and polishing, and that's when the real process of writing starts, I think. But you've got to get that first draft done, and don't give up. Don't give up on that. Just get it done. It's always going to be awful, and I think that's really hard to see that awful work. But just knowing that it gets better, it really does, and that's where the fun starts. I think people fall into two camps. Some people love the first draft, where it's all creative and playing, and you can do whatever you want. And some people hate that, and then others really like the subsequent drafts where you're polishing and crafting, and I really like that too. So it depends. But yeah, finish it. See what happens.
No.
Yeah, I don't know how much authority I have to answer this question, because I've only written one book and it took me 5 years. But I think maybe kind of to echo what these guys said, I think I was lucky my partner was really a big part of me writing this book. I was finding work really stressful, and he said maybe the solution to your work stress is to be found outside of work in doing something for yourself. And every morning he would kind of elbow me and say, get out of bed, go and do your writing. And on the weekends he'd say, no, make sure you make time for your writing. And maybe, I guess, my advice then would be, if you can get someone, it's doing that writing every day, but maybe if you can have someone to kind of help you or hold you accountable or kind of be a cheerleader for you doing that writing. That can be really helpful. And maybe the other thing is, I think I was kind of arrogant when I started writing this, and I was like, I can write a book, like it's going to be relatively easy. And it was so hard. And also just being honest with myself about how bad the early drafts were. I would finish it all. Like one time I rented this like little like camper van on someone's property up in upstate New York, and I went up there and I like wrote the novel, and I was like, yay, it's done. And it was freezing, it was snowing, Thanksgiving. Every item of clothes I brought I had to layer on top of each other, walked into town with great difficulty at the library, printed it off, went and started reading it. I got about 5 pages in, I was like, this is not done, this is awful, it's not even really a book. But I think like coming to terms with that and not giving up, and also just being, not also turning that draft in, not saying like, oh, it is done, and kidding myself, but saying, oh, this is actually much harder than I thought it would be, and I'm not a natural at this, and it's going to take a lot of work, and just keeping on going maybe is the kind of depressing truth. Yeah.
Yeah, it is hard work. Now, you have to excuse me, I've got to consult Carmel's run sheet, don't I? Are we running over time?
Perfectly on time.
Oh, okay. Is this where we do the raffle?
I announce everything and we have the raffle.
Oh. Good evening, everybody. Do we have a break first?
Yeah.
Oh, Ruth, announce break. Hey. All right, we're going to have a break for how long? 20 minutes, and in which time we will be... Well, in which time you absolutely must go up the back to the Sun Bookshop stall and buy some books, especially the new releases from our lovely guests, and get yourselves a last-minute raffle ticket. Bring the books up, and I'm sure the women would be happy to sign them for you, and that's kind of special. Don't forget to join or rejoin Sisters in Crime. Don't you look at me. And they've got some terrific merchandise over there on the stall too. So if you'd like to just get up, stretch, have a look around at the stalls, say good day to everybody, get your book signed. We'll be back here in about 20 minutes.
And I'll just do a couple of photos.
All right, we might get back to proceedings. We're now going to draw the raffles. So there are 3 prizes. So our lovely authors will draw one each. You can't blame me. All right, dip in.
Oh, you've got to go there. Do I ask to come down there?
You've got to come out here, I think, because you get to present the prize. All right, and the winning ticket is... It's a yellow D069.
Oh, Sylvia!
Woohoo! Which means you get your photo taken with Celia.
Photo, I've just a bit further over from the system.
Can have it.
That's a good idea. Yes, it is. All right. Right, there's one. Right. Thank you very much. I know where you live. Yes, I know that.
All right, next. And Tanya's going to draw this one.
Oh, come down.
Carmel, Stan wants you to stand in front of his Spielberg operation.
All right, okay. Oh, okay.
So the winning ticket is... I know. It's a green 048. Woohoo! Yeah, I better not throw that back in, that would be cheap.
That's photo one, girls. All right. Fantastic. Great.
All right, and Megan, lucky last. Got it. And the winner, it's a yellow, and it's 078. 078. Robin!
Who's got it?
Yay!
This is a delicious one. Congratulations on your book now. It's really, really good. I really enjoyed it.
I really enjoyed reading yours. It was.
I didn't say that.
No. I'm being honest. It was so. Yeah, unforgettable. But I can imagine it would have been really difficult to write.
All right.
Yeah.
So that's fantastic. Some lucky people got to go home with free books. But don't feel disappointed, you've got one more chance. It's question time. Bear in mind that Priscilla is casting her ears over your questions because the best question is going to win a prize. Who would like to stick their hand up or shout or whatever and ask the authors any questions? Come on, make one up. Yeah.
There is a book to read. How did you settle on your titles?
You've got to say your name.
Oh, hello, I'm Ali. How did you settle on your titles for your stories?
With difficulty. Stay Awake, initially it was going to be called Insomnia, and then we came up with I came up with the idea Stay Awake. I think there was some suggestion of Don't Sleep. But I struggle a little bit. My first two books, I came up with the titles like that, and ever since then it's been downhill from there. So it's tough.
Sorry, is it something that you start with, or is it once you've written the book?
Often it's something I start with, but then sometimes by the time you submit the manuscript, the publisher doesn't like it, or somebody's, you walk into a bookshop and you look at, there's so many books, and I mean, there's only so many words in the English language, and it feels like every title has been taken. So I think it's a really tough thing, a title. Yeah.
Yes, I've always struggled with titles. My first two books, there were about 100 different titles before they settled on it, but all that I remember about Dean Kohler, they didn't change that. It was always going to be all that I remember about Dean Kohler. I did have one other working title. What was it? You Used to Love Me, I think, but then it became obvious that that should have been the title because my protagonist is writing pieces within the book called All That I Remember about Dean Kohler, and I thought they might say it was too long or argue, but no one ever mentioned an alternative title because I wouldn't have changed it anyway.
And for me, the title was one of the last things that I did. I just kind of called it the novel. And then, the publisher didn't change. And I guess, like, the place, like, the name of Eden felt like an opportunity to, like, riff on a bit in the title. Yeah.
Celia. Oh, sorry.
That's right, it's Bronwyn. Have you or would you ever write a male protagonist?
I have, actually. It hasn't been published, but I've written an espionage thriller with a male protagonist, and I really loved it. It was a lot of fun. Yeah, I hope it gets published one day and then you can read it.
I said I never would, but I am. Now, yes. I'm writing 2 points of view, which is really different for me, and one is a male character. Yeah.
Yeah, I would like to, but I think it's just a matter of whether I feel like I would be able to convincingly kind of step into those shoes. I'm experimenting with maybe having a cast of characters and some of them be male, but it probably wouldn't be first person. It'd probably be like a close third. So maybe it's a goal. Yeah.
It's really hard. I'm like saying to my partner, tell me, what's a man thought? You know, what would a man do? Would a man really do this? What do they say? What's it really like?
There is a range.
Nell, I'm sorry, you used the name of a place earlier that was near Eden, that it was really set about, and I forgot to ask you when I came up.
Yeah, Tathra. So it is very close to Eden, but that's just the area, well, actually it was in Callaroo that my grandparents had. I don't know how well you know that area of the coast, but I really love Tathra, and I love Eden as well. But yeah, so there are some beaches around there that are kind of in the book.
Eden's great, isn't it? Yeah. Just as long as it's not East of Eden, that amazing TV show where the couple goes on their honeymoon and she gets allegedly taken by a crocodile. Return to Eden. Oh my God. I suppose it turns out she...
But it wasn't even as in that kind of life.
Yeah, anyway, it turns out, of course, that she didn't die from the crocodile, that she had been transformed by plastic surgeons. So bad. Oh my God.
I think Robin's got a question.
I do. But I'll wait until our illustrious leader has finished her little
Indeed.
treatise. I'm fascinated by all of you saying that you have to do lots of drafts. I mean, I'm not quite sure how you... Do you start again? Do you throw out what you've done before? When I'm writing, I do 3,000 words a day, and then I finish writing it. I sort of pre-edit the next day, go to what I've just written, keep going. When I finish the last full stop, I give it to the editor and say, there you go, I'm done. I never, ever redraft. I mean, it would drive me crazy. So how many redrafts do you do, and how do you go about doing that?
Just thinking, depends on the book, but I'll have a first draft, and then I will... I mean, I've been lucky enough that I haven't had to do any structural edits, but I will have a first draft, and then I'll kind of polish it, and I might involve rewriting some chapters and cutting others and adding other chapters, but a lot of it is just polishing the existing chapters. And probably for me, I guess I probably would end up having about 3 drafts. And then you have the whole copy editing process, which is 3 times. So that's a lot of time to be spending on a manuscript. And I've been putting out, other than, I think, during the first year of COVID, I've been putting out a book a year. So it's writing and editing all at the same time, and it's kind of exhausting.
All right, more questions?
What about
Sorry.
What about ours? What about ours?
I was doing so well.
I start with draft 0 and 0.0, and then if I change anything dramatically as I go along, it becomes like a change of character or something major, then I'll go back and call it 0.2 and until I get to the end of that, and then it'll become draft 1. And that at that point I print out draft 0 and I look at it and I open a new blank document and I retype it from nothing, because as I'm typing, so I'm writing and I'm reading at the same time, so my brain works differently, and I can see the repetition more easily, and if there's something that it's boring, I go, I don't really want to retype that, then I think, it's probably going to be boring to the reader, and I start to shape it and structure it, and then when I get to the end of that, doing the versions again, And also, I'm still writing scenes and things at that stage. And then eventually I'll get to draft 2, 2.1, 2.100, whatever. When I get to the end of draft 2, then I'll get feedback on it. I'll ask a few author friends to read it. And then I'll take in the feedback, and then it'll become draft 3. But I think Dean Kohler had 6 drafts rather than 3.
Yeah, I wish I could write 3,000 words a day, and there are lots of writers who can just write something really brilliant on the first draft. I am not one of those people.
Probably not either. That's what I do.
It sounds like you are. I wrote the first draft of this by hand so that I knew that I wouldn't have to show it to anyone, and it would always be just a draft, and it gave me the freedom, to write whatever I wanted to, and it was kind of safe, and it was just mine, and then I typed it out, and every new draft I started from a blank document, and I did at least 5.
Wow, so that's 5 books though.
Well, it's really just the same. And I wouldn't call the early ones books.
But handwriting.
Yeah, in notebooks. It was actually kind of cool when I was done, because I'd never really filled a notebook before, and I filled heaps of them, so that was very satisfying.
I've banished myself from the microphone for jumping in. Celia, did you have another question?
The question is, you're typing, that's to the 2 that are typing, which product are you using to type in, i.e. Scrivener or one of the others? And do you have ever a time where you set up a timeline with displays, sticky notes, that sort of thing? Or, because I know that you did say you pantsers to a certain extent, but do you also go and use something as your method of getting a timeline?
I don't, but for example, with Stay Awake, I landed up writing chapter summaries once I'd written it in sticky notes, so that I could kind of look at how it was structured, because I sort of lost. I got myself confused. So I did do that. In terms of what product, I'd actually just use like a Word document. I actually was thinking of getting some highfalutin, editing software, whatever, and I did some reading about what people recommend, and then somebody said that real writers just use the most basic tools, and I find it easier just using a Word document. Going back to what you were saying about handwriting, which I could never do because my hands just aren't strong enough. It does hurt. But in terms of multiple drafts, I have a feeling that in the past, when people, wrote their books on typewriters, that they probably didn't write as many drafts because it was such a labour-intensive process that you really thought about every word, and it's very easy when you're using a computer to move paragraphs around and try things in different ways and experiment and then go back to the original. So I suspect that in the past people didn't have to do so many drafts because they were just very thoughtful about what they wrote, and it was probably close to the final version. But maybe I'm wrong. I don't know.
I just use Word as well. I don't use any writing products or anything, just a boring old Word document. I teach my writing students to make timelines and all sorts of plot diagrams and things, but I tried to do... No, I have used index cards, but once I'd written the manuscript and the totally wasn't working. I wrote scenes, or I can't remember if it was scenes or chapters, maybe scenes on cards, so I could look at it and then, move things around. But that was kind of after I'd already written it, just so I could see what was going wrong within the acts.
And And when I do type, I use Word too, and I do make timelines. I love making timelines. I'll, just in a fit of excitement, make a timeline at any moment. You never know when another one is coming.
Are there any more questions?
Yeah, this is right on. What's on your bedside reading at the moment? Yes.
That was Morag, and the question is, what is on their bedside reading at the moment?
I always draw a blank. I can't remember. I've just gone through. When I write, I don't generally read, and then when I stop writing, I read a lot, and it becomes kind of a bit of a blur in terms of what I've read. I'm sorry, I have to think about that. You go ahead.
I'm reading a really interesting book called Colour, which is a non-fiction book about the origins of colours, I guess. So where paints come from. It starts with ochre and then goes through black and white, and just talks about the different types of paint that was used and where it was derived from, and things like that. It's really interesting. I'm also reading The Book Thief. I've never read any Marcus Zusak. I didn't realise. I'm not sure. Is that a young adult novel? I just picked it up. Yeah, it was interesting because there's a lot of colour in that book as well. So I'm reading the non-fiction and reading that as well. Is it non?
It's used in schools.
Yeah.
It's an adult that also sort of fits into the young adult.
Yeah, I wasn't quite sure, but for some reason I haven't read any of his work before, so I thought it was about time, so I just picked it up. So I'm reading those two at the same time. But yeah.
I just finished Antoine Wilson, Mouth to Mouth, which is this really cool thriller about a guy who bumps into an old friend from uni at the airport, and the protagonist is kind of a bit scruffy, a writer, and the old friend is looking very well polished and takes him to the first class lounge and sits him down and proceeds to tell him a story. And then the story that he tells is kind of the novel about when he was at the beach and he saves this guy's life by giving him mouth to mouth, and then kind of becomes obsessed with him and sort of insinuates himself into his life. And it's all about that. It's an American author, and it's all about the art scene in LA and kind of about money and class. It's really good, and it's a pretty quick read. And then up next, I haven't started, but I just bought Grace D. Lee's Portrait of a Thief, which sounds really cool. I don't know if you've heard about it. It's about a guy at Harvard, a student who is approached by a Chinese corporation, and he's a Chinese student, a Chinese American, to steal back Chinese artworks from, I think 5 artworks from a museum. It sounds really cool. I think I've only read 3 pages, but it's really good so far.
All right, any more questions? No? Priscilla, do you need time to cogitate?
Yes, please.
All right. Is this where we play cogitating music? While we're waiting for Priscilla...
Make announcements.
All right. I'll hand over to Carmel.
Yeah, well, hang on, I've got one more. No, that wasn't it. It was just...
Go on, ask. Go on.
No, it wasn't. I wasn't directing it to anyone.
Oh, okay. All right.
Follow up later on.
Oh, okay.
The script.
Oh, it's here. I banished myself from it. Do you want it?
All right, thank you. So before we get on to the, fulsome thanks, I just want to announce the next couple of events. My name's Carmel. So the next events, we're back here very soon, 3 weeks' time, Friday the 28th of October for Felony and Fun. So 3 Melbourne authors, Kirsty Manning, Catherine Kovacic and Alicia Nardo, will explore with Angela Savage how their plots and protagonists lift spirits and even crack smiles. So we think this is the ideal way to loosen up for the end of the year, and it'll be followed by a very brief AGM. So our last 2 AGMs have been very, very late because of the pandemic. So even though our last AGM was in May, we still have to have another AGM to get back into sync as demanded by the Consumer Affairs. And then we'll be back here again on Saturday the 3rd of December, 6:30 p.m. for the 29th Scarlet Stiletto Awards. So no one else knows this. So the great thrill is that Nicole Shamoon, the star of Troppo, based on the novel Crimson Lake by our long-standing member Candace Fox, will be presenting the awards. Hooray! And so we're requesting that everyone come in tropical attire, and I know that Andrew Gelbart has got a very nice Hawaiian shirt. I've seen him in it. So there'll be a prize for the best outfit.
So this is the Saturday the 3rd.
Saturday the 3rd. And so, Priscilla, are you ready to make an announcement? Do you want to come out here and make an announcement? Oh yes, and then proxy forms. So for the AGM, we have to meet the requirements of Consumer Affairs, we have to have a 10% representation, and of course most of our members are spread all over the place. So if you could sign a proxy form, that would be really, really appreciated, because we need to have a 1 in 10% turn up, including people who come or stay for the meeting and who could sign a proxy form. Okay? Hey?
You want a signature on a blank form?
We've got forms here. We're not sort of certain political parties, Robin.
So if you're coming to the meeting and you know you're coming to the meeting, you don't know proxy. If you're not sure if you're coming or you know you're not coming, then you fill out a proxy. And if you decide to come, having to fill out a proxy, just withdraw your proxy.
Yeah.
Make sense?
Yeah. So it's very simple, and it does not involve exchange of monies. All right, Priscilla. And can I present Priscilla Darmain? She is, amongst her many claims to fame, our Scarlet Stiletto Judging Awards coordinator this year, and she's done a splendid job. Whoa! Hey, great!
I'll be very brief. As someone with a groaning bedside table, I picked Morag's question as reading.
Yes, so Morag won a raffle very recently, and she said it's the first time she's ever won a raffle in her life. I personally have won a dark version. Am I presenting this to her? You are. Morag. Oh, no. Congratulations. No, Priscilla's actually. And Priscilla's just disappeared. Well, because get up here. All right, hang on, I'll put her trophy back on. Oh, you could take that off, it's pretty tacky. All right, girls. Looking here. Hooray! I think you should be holding the book more. And now, can we present the authors with a small token of our esteem? Thank you. I hope you'll bring us.
Thank you.
You might have to put that aside for later. Now.
You're just basically you at the end voting.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thanks very much.
And haven't they done a splendid job? What a top night. Thank you. Thank you, authors. Thank you, Ruth. And Ruth's been a bit unwell this week, but she has triumphed. So, fantastic. And thank you all for coming, and we look forward to see you here in 3 weeks' time. And bring your friends along for felony and fun. Cheers.
Thank you all.
Thank you. It was a lot of fun. Thank
And
you.
it was delightful to meet you, and